Hi, everybody. It's time to read some more from our Thomas Edison book, The Great Inventor. And today I'll start out by showing you some pictures. I think you remember last time how we talked about Edison was born in Ohio. Well, here's a picture of his house. It's now a museum. Do you know what a museum is? A museum is a place that you can go and visit. It's a historical place usually that you can find out some information. So this little brick house in Milan, Ohio, is where Thomas Edison was born on February 11th, 1847. The house was built by his father. If you remember, I told you that Thomas, when he was 12 or 14 years old, was a candy butcher on a train. And I thought, wonder what a candy butcher is. So you know me, I had to go online and I had to look up what a candy butcher was. And he was someone that sold newspapers and candy and different confections, they called them, sweet treats. So he was on the train and he sold sweet treats and he sold newspapers. And that's when he went to the library and he read all those books. Do you remember that? It said during this period in his life was when he suffered permanent impairment of his hearing and began growing deaf. So here's a picture of Thomas Edison when he was about 12 or 14 years old. Edison's first commercial invention was the printing telegraph, or the stock ticker. Remember I told you about the money that he got for that stock ticker, $40,000? Well, this stock ticker was introduced in 1870, and it was used for about 80 years for receiving stock and commodity quotations from the nation's leading exchanges. And this is what the machine looked like. It's kind of an interesting machine, isn't it? So those are just some of his inventions that he did. So we're going to go back in our book, and it kind of goes back and forth about some of the things that he did. So in the early 1870s, he completed the monograph and the automatic telegraph system. That was one of his inventions. He also invented in 1874 the electric pen and manual duplicating press for making copies of written materials. And they called that a mimeograph machine. Okay, so here is a picture back here that tells about the electrical pen and the press. So if you can see that picture there was the press, and there was the electrical pen. So I thought that was interesting. I'll read to you what it says about it. Edison invented the electric pen and duplicating press in 1876. Atop the pen was a small motor powered by a battery of 2 wet cells. So I don't know if you can see it very well, but up here on top, okay, so here's the hand that's holding the pen, and at the top was the 2 batteries, okay? That was neat, I thought. I didn't know there was an electric pen, did you? A person would write with the pen in the normal manner. As the pen moved across a sheet of paper, it made tiny perforations in the paper. The sheet thus became a stencil. Placing the stencil on a clean sheet of paper and then running an inked roller over the stencil produced a copy of the written material. That stencil was good for about 5,000 rollings. So I thought that was really neat. So in 1869, Edison set up a shop in Newark to manufacture stock tickers. This was an enterprise employing 50 people. His integrity reached out into other fields. In quick succession, he perfected the automatic telegraph, he improved the typewriter, and invented the carbon transmitter to make Alexander Graham Bell's telephone commercially practical. All these things way back long ago. Here the lesson from General Lefter stood him in the good stead. He had decided to ask $25,000 for the transmitter, but suggested that Western Union, which had engaged him, make an offer, which turned out to be $100,000. So he found out it was better not to charge a price, but to say, how much do you offer me? Well, that's not always the case nowadays, but back then it worked for him. With his success as an inventor and a manufacturer at the age of 23, Thomas Alvan Edison in 1870 plunged into a period of feverish endeavor that has no parallel in the lives of other great men of science. That means he worked really hard to get some things accomplished. His fertile brain and boundless energy drove him from one great invention to another, each of which in turn launched new manufacturing enterprises, giving employment to thousands of people. Few were his working days that did not extend through 20 of the 24 hours. He worked really long hours. The group of men who worked closely with him as his immediate assistants earned the name of the Insomnia Squad. Do you know what insomnia is? They didn't get to sleep. They worked. Well, that's not good for us. We need to have our time of sleep. They said that he was a good boss and he just kept working. Actually, there was no boss, since, as the men who worked with him had testified, he worked harder and longer, and he looked less like the owner of the plant than anyone present. A casual visitor, we were told, would have regarded Edison as one of the least likely persons to have been in charge because he worked so hard. He didn't look like he was the boss. Okay, so I'll show you a picture. He opened up a manufacturing plant called Menlo Park. And here's a picture of it. This is the big building here. There's the fence. And over here on the far side, you can see train cars. And he had electrical trains. So I'll read to you what this says. Menlo Park, New Jersey, in the winter of 1880 to 1881. And remember, up there in New Jersey, it's very cold and they have snow. Okay, so here's our map. And over here is where New Jersey is. Right over here is where this picture was, okay? The main laboratory, built in 1876, runs up the center of the yard. Behind it is the large machine shop, and to the right, the glass blower shed set at an angle. So here's the glass blower shed. You can kind of see here's the long building that he uses as a shop. Quite a bit of property, right? With lots of buildings. The train is up in the upper right. It was part of Edison's electric railway endeavor, from which came the first full-size locomotive made in America. The carbon factory, the far left in this map, produced the lamp black that Edison needed to achieve a successful telephone transmitter, and an incandescent lamp filament. At the very bottom of the drawing is the library and the office building. I think that's right there. You know how he liked libraries. I hope you can go visit a library someday if you've never been to a library. I love libraries. They have lots of books. In the late 1920s, Edison's close friend and great industrialist Henry Ford relocated Menlo Park to Ford's historic Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. It was a true location. Listen to this. Listen to what they did. Every building, all these buildings here, was disassembled and reassembled, board by board, brick by brick. All the contents were transported and put in their original places. Even the red New Jersey clay was shipped to Michigan. Okay, so Henry Ford was a very famous man, and he wanted to move Thomas Edison's land, or he couldn't move his land, but he wanted to move his buildings up to where he was in Michigan. That was a big job. I don't know too many people that want to take apart buildings and move them, but that's what they did. So the institution known as Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford Museum was dedicated in 1929. So many years later, they moved all that stuff. But in the meantime, Edison was working there and he used it. Okay, so here's another picture. Edison's machine shop at the rear of the main laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This drawing was in 1878, just before they took the equipment apart. So he had lots of equipment. He had some really neat things that he created. He invented, I mean. So now it's question time. Can you remember what I told you? Can you remember what Thomas Edison did when he was a young boy? What was his job? He went on the train, right? He sold candy and other sweet treats. And let's see. What else do you remember from what I told you? Can you tell me? I'm waiting. He had a big shop, didn't he? A really, really big shop. Well, back here, do you remember what he made that had a motor on the top of it? Remember? His electric pen. So what did he have that ran the electric pen? Do you remember what was up inside of there? Batteries. That must have been a really neat pen, right? And it made places on the paper that made it turn into a stencil. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed our tour through Thomas Edison's book. We had a good time learning today, didn't we? So bye for now.